So I went to college at Tulane University in New Orleans, which is that's an appropriate response. And before I read the poem that I wrote when I was at Tulane, I'm going to read the precursor poem so that you guys will have some background. All right, cool? All right, go. So I wrote this book. It's called Becoming Black. My real name is Mwende Katwiwa, FreeQuency the stage name. I'm from Kenya. The book is about coming into blackness as a cultural and political identity here in the United States versus like back home. I'm like, oh, I'm black, you black, we all black, cool. We ain't got to think about it. And here it's like, so yeah, I wrote this whole book about it. I got them back there if anyone's interested in it. But one of the things I asked myself a couple of questions as I was writing it. And one of the questions I asked was when you first really remember feeling black or identifying with blackness or at being something in your life that wasn't just like, you know, your first moment of recognition. And that's where this piece came from. When the little white girl called me and Mo niggers, I didn't really know what she meant. I'd only known nigger as a dead word buried deep in the pages of history, decayed in the throats of forefathers that had been buried along with their language. Her breath blew the dust from the coffins and unearthed an entire history reburied into my body. When the little white girl called me and Mo niggers, Mo knew exactly what she meant. Each syllable tightened an unseen noose that had always itched at the back of his neck. I watched as a sixth grade smile shattered against the lunchroom table. Her laugh, loud and lined with hatred, shook every last piece onto the cafeteria floor. I don't think I reminded him to pick up the pieces when it was all over. I was too busy trying to figure out how in one moment I could know so little and in the next be all about it. But when the little white girl called me and Mo niggers, I felt her bark grow teeth and become bite, a wound that would go on to infect the rest of my life. Me and Mo were sent to the principal's office. We hadn't actually done anything. I had stayed seated while Mo yelled at her from a distance. Looking back, there must have been something passed down his bloodline that made his bones become boulders and beg him to remember what happens when black boys come too close to white girls with anything but obedience on their tongues. We sat, banished in that office, licking our wounds, and I was left feeling like a soldier in a war I had just realized I was fighting. That's it. Now, man, so when I started writing this book, I was actually still in college. And like I said, I went to Tulane University. It's a predominantly white school in New Orleans, which is a black city. And it was a really surreal experience to be in school there, to be like a black person in a black city, in a white bubble. And it's also really expensive, right? That school is like $60,000 fucking dollars a year. And they gave me a really good scholarship, but it also like wasn't enough. So when I was in college, I was an RA, which is resident advisor, which meant I was basically like taking care of some grown-ass, spoiled-ass rich white people because they couldn't. It was a fucking mess, right? But basically, I had this job, right? You were an RA too, weren't you?
What?
Were you an RA? No? Okay, well they make us go through this diversity training, right? Where they're like, moja and shit, right? It's really bullshit and no one does anything with it, but I had a co-RA, he was a white dude from somewhere, who knows, white people land, and he came, like, I was working the front desk, because also being an RA means you're an indentured servant, basically, you have to work the front desk and they don't pay you. So I was sitting there at like 2 in the morning, because that's what I should be doing instead of sleeping during college. And he walks in with his like suitcase and stuff and was like, I'm like, what's up, Sean? Like, where are you coming from? It's 2 o'clock. He's like, oh, well, you know, I'm coming from a Model United Nations conference, blah, 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 nigger. And I was like, oh. That was my exact reaction. It was like a delayed, like, come again? Like, what just happened? And it was a really interesting experience because it had been a minute. I had just come back from Kenya. I went to study abroad, which meant like I went and hang out on my grandma's farm for like 6 months. And I was just like, I was feeling it. I was like really happy and blessed in my blackness, and like my ancestors were strong, you know, on my shoulders and shit. And then this man just came and just like knocked me right back down with that one word. And it was a really defining moment for me at Tulane, because for my first 2 years there, I'd just been like, okay, I'm going to pretend like I'm not suffocating and drowning in unbearable whiteness. This is fine. This is fine. And it wasn't fine. And I came back, and that was a moment where I was like, well, shit, I can either go back to my room and just like shed a thug tear about it and be like, I'm good, or I could like make a real a real stand about this, and that was the moment, for those of you who went to school with me, that I became like the one day that everyone knew on campus with like the activism and all that other stuff, was because of this fuckboy. And he even made it into my book, so I'm going to share that with y'all. And then I'm going to tell you, well, here, this is for you. And I'll tell y'all the end of the story, just so you understand the whiteness. It's crazy. When my white coworker in college called me nigger, I not punched him in the face. I not bothered to tell him about every bone in both my hands begged to bruise that became part of the breaking of his porcelain body. I wanted to, but then I remembered the Confederate flag that hung above his bed in his dorm room, and in that moment, the unseen noose that tightened around my neck choked back my words down my throat until they bounced back into the muted mouths of the bodies a little white girl once buried in mine. When my white coworker in college called me nigger, my white supervisor asked me, did he say it in a mean way?
Oh my God. Wow.
I asked her if it mattered. If his lack of anger should have made me hug him back when he came around the table to say, I'm sorry, after he realized he had crossed the shaky bridge he had already been halfway across before. I wanted to tell her I'd sat up all night wishing Mo was there helping me lick my wounds. How maybe then he might have reminded me to pick up the smile I left shattered on the floor and never went back for. When my white coworker in college called me nigger, my black supervisor asked me, did he say it with an A or an ER? I wanted to ask her if it mattered. If changing the ending of a word could truly rewrite the story it had started to tell. Instead, I laughed it off and left her office. A few months later, she told me that in that moment before my laughter, she had looked into my eyes and saw my face become a stony facade. Instead of eroding beneath the waves of tears she saw crashing at the shores of my eyelids. That when I got up to leave, she swore she saw the bloated bodies inside of me, booing me from my chair and float me out of her office.